Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This webinar will start shortly. Feel free to write in the chat where you're from. It's amazing to see you all logging in. Wow, okay, we're being very global, all over the world. Amazing, welcome. Thanks for joining. We'll just wait a bit until some more people have logged on, so stay tuned. All right, let's get started and welcome everyone. I'm so pleased to be here and host this second consumer masterclass as part of the GFA Academy Masterclass program. So this first session is called The Consequences of Consumption, and is the second one following a three episode series. So welcome everyone, and my name is Christina. If I can just change slides, please. Yes, so my name is Christina, and I head up Innovation and Academy at GFA. And GFA Global Fashion Agenda is a non-for-profit organization where we work towards a net positive future, which is hard, but which is important. And that's why we're all here, and I hope that's why you are also here. And again, I can see more and more people log on. So again, welcome. We have just started. This session will be recorded and made public afterwards on gfa-globalfashionagenda.org. So welcome again, and I am super excited to be here. Just to summarize, this is the second episode of our Consumer Masterclass series that is made for connecting brands with consumers on different topics within sustainability. 3 weeks ago, we had our first masterclass in this series that was about defining terms and understanding sustainable brand practices. And for those of you who weren't there or haven't rewatched it, and again, you can see it on our webpage, I just wanted to mention some key takeaways. And besides these key takeaways, this series will also come out with a small summary of key points from all the masterclasses. So both defining the actual terms, getting the key points from the speakers, and being a small guide that you guys can take with you. So, but just to talk about this first masterclass we did a couple of weeks ago, key takeaways from these panelists were, among others, that the glossary of sustainability terms are shrinking moving forwards due to regulation. And it's important that sustainability terms and targets needs to be more understandable for consumers. And you can do that by using technology and data. And here I want to reference our innovation forum that is also online on our webpage, where we have a lot of solution providers covering the whole supply chain. Most important, be transparent about your journey and not only communicate the wins, but also the challenges and the losses, which equals education, where we can educate the consumer. And then again, we are going to have a policy masterclass series in the new year, because new law will also force brands to disclose their carbon footprint and also what actions they will do to lower their emissions. All right. Next slide, please. So this masterclass series wouldn't have happened without BBC StoryWorks. So GFA and BBC has together done a series around sustainability in fashion that is called that is called Fashion Redressed, produced by BBC. It's a very beautiful and human-centric story showing the reality of our industry. And as part of that, we have Laura, who's the senior series developer on Fashion Redressed, who's here today to give us some insights from a report they have done that will match the conversation that we're going to have. Hey, Laura.
Hi, Christina. Thanks so much. And yeah, just delighted to be able to contribute to this panel today for the second the Consumer Masterclass series, and yeah, really excited to hear more from the incredible women on the panel shortly. Yeah, all of those on the call are really in for a treat. I work as a senior series developer within BBC StoryWorks, and so what that means is I led early development of the Fashion Redressed series, which, as Christina mentions, was released back in September. And that was a series that was produced for the global fashion agenda by BBC StoryWorks. And it sets out to ask, can the global fashion industry put more back into society than it takes out? And profiling some of the innovators and organizations who are racing to sort of answer that question in the affirmative. The result is, I think, a really wide-ranging collection of films. So we have each film focusing on a bespoke solution or character or story. And we managed to cover a lot, whether looking at how you find a more sustainable source for rubber. We had a story on the importance of cultural appreciation in a community in Arizona, or indeed profiling more circular models for fashion through Pre-Loved. And I think we're going to be playing one of those films about pre-loved fashion shortly, or at the end of the insights. But in creating that series, we worked really closely with Christina and the GFA team, alongside an incredibly talented team of creatives and production and marketing experts, crews all over the world. And my role was really to work at that pre-production stage to sort of connect the dots across industry and audience and creative insights to draw up what was a bit of a data-driven storytelling strategy where we can hit on the various themes and narratives and really the tone that's going to best engage and also sort of inform, but also entertain global audiences when it comes to sustainable fashion. So to really to better dig into the latter, we commissioned this BBC Global Minds survey, which was a survey of around 6,500 global BBC.com users across really a range of ages, locations, genders. And this was really a chance to figure out what are the kind of shifts we're seeing in perceptions and attitudes and behaviors in fashion, and why does that matter? How can that feed into the storytelling? And I'd love just to, over the next 5 or 10 minutes, just to briefly touch upon some of those top line findings from that survey, which can hopefully help frame some of the discussion today, but also hopefully you can see some of the ways that those insights can find their way into the series and its films, the sort of final product, if you like. So if you just go to the next slide, thanks, Christina. I guess the first thing to note from this survey is that there is this significant and increasing consumer interest in sustainable fashion. Nearly half of respondents are more interested in reading or learning about sustainable fashion than they were a year ago. And a similar proportion, 54%, agreed that the environmental impact of their clothes matters more to them now than it did a year ago. I suppose that beyond the broad appeal that indicates that kind of fashion has, it gives us an insight into the fact that consumers are becoming more aware and more personally involved in the consequences of that consumption. And if you go on to the next slide, Christine, thanks. Not only are those attitudes shifting, but the survey tells us that attitudes are translating through to behavior gaps. And consumers are really gravitating towards more sustainable practices. So according to this survey, we've got more and more people reducing their consumption of fast fashion and fashion more broadly for environmental reasons. The attitude behavior gap is something that is, I think, quite well documented in this industry, but perhaps what we're seeing here is a kind of narrowing of that divergence in purchase intention and purchase experience. Essentially, the numbers from the first slide and the second are fairly similar. So in short, that kind of poses the question, are more consumers walking the walk when it comes to moderating consumption? Are they taking a more active role in that? If you just go to the next slide. Thanks. There we can sort of dig a little bit deeper into the ways in which consumers are taking that more active role. So our survey indicates that consumers are thinking, and you can see here, critically about the intersection between affordability and sustainability. But what this slide also gives us a really fascinating insight into is that emergence of more circular models for consumption, and namely sort of secondhand clothing, repair, mending, essentially giving clothes that second life. And this redefining boom in pre-loved clothes is also something that is well documented in the fashion industry. We're seeing global data shows that the clothes resale market in the UK alone grew by 150% between 2016 and 2022. So the resale revolution is something that we really wanted to tap into with the stories that we looked into. And I think we'll show this film that we produced for eBay shortly, where we touch upon some of that. But more broadly, and if you just go to the next slide, I think the previous statistics or previous slides show us that there is just huge progress being made when it comes to consumer attitudes and behaviors and perceptions. But what the survey also indicates is that there are opportunities for brands to have this more meaningful, productive, two-way discussion with consumers about the consequences of their consumption. And according to the survey, the way that discussion should be set up needs to be, and this applies in particular to younger generations, it needs to be transparent. And this is something that we touched upon in the last masterclass as well, but it also needs to be constructive. And just to kind of round those insights off, if you go to the next slide, thanks, and possibly to get onto the slightly more glamorous part of what we do, how does all of that translate through to the production process and the films and the Fashion Redressed series? We'll be hearing more from policy and brands in a range of perspectives shortly, but from a storytelling perspective, some of those principles that have guided our approach to consumption is urgency. In this series, it's about not shying away from the consequences of consumption. All the statistics beyond those in the survey show that there is this really urgent need to accelerate the commitment to fair labor and to reduced emissions and to a circular economy. So being cognizant of that urgency, that sort of imperative to improve, can really be the origin story for solutions and ideas that matter. We see this in one of the films that we made for Vestiaire Collective, where the co-founders visit to Ghana is a sobering turning point in what their business model looks like. So kind of visualizing that urgency and telling those stories and not shying away from it is important. At the same time, coupling that urgency with optimism is equally important. And something our team spoke about a lot at the start of this series was, how do we imbue sustainability with a sense of style? Fashion can be fun, and it can be this powerful medium of expression, this powerful messenger of who we are, how we interact with the world and with one another. So how do you create constructive stories that tap into that? And it's about building that into the stories tonally, with storytelling that is, on the one hand, cognizant of what needs to change, but really captures that dynamism and creativity that the fashion world offers. When looking at consumption as well, we want to think about proximity. And this is really about broadening the sustainability discourse to encompass other relevant actors and in particular consumers. And I suppose that's possibly why the GFA have set up these masterclasses in the first instance. This was a really crucial part of our development process. So how can we be more inclusive of the consumer voice in the planning of the series and in the production of the stories? How do we bring those stories closer to the experiences and perspectives of consumers in the audience? So the film that we'll watch momentarily does this really, really nicely. We have a consumer influencer personal story at the forefront. And I think that enables the audience to feel real proximity to her narrative, but also beyond the kind of development and production stage. We wanted to continue to involve consumer voices. And those of you that will have visited the Fashion Redressed site, and if not, I will urge you to do so, might have completed this clothes calculator, which really creates this interactive experience, which then provides guidance and bespoke user journeys based on a visitor's habits and their likes and dislikes. And that was really kind of coming full circle in that we were able to build that proximity, that personalization through a kind of gamified experience and keeping consumers really front and center in all of that. So going to pass back to Christina to run the session with the panelists. But first, I think we are going to play the eBay film that I mentioned from the series. And of course, if anybody has further questions on the survey, the series, anything else, you can get in touch with me directly after the panel.
I've been a pre-loved champion for as long as I can remember. There are so many things I love about pre-loved. That you save money, the quality is often better, things have a story to them. It's something you don't get with buying new. It's long been a dream of mine that pre-loved becomes cool. So when eBay, the OG of pre-loved, asked me to come on board to style Love Island, it was a complete no-brainer. That's everything my whole life is about. I've been using eBay and buying and selling for 22 years. I've joked before that my house is like the house that eBay built. Almost everything is from eBay. My son's clothes. It's a real way of life. You get that sense of individuality, which is really important to me. And I would really say that it's the first step towards a more environmentally conscious wardrobe. There are enough clothes on the planet already. Whatever you're looking for, if it's that perfect trench coat, a perfect black dress, they're already in existence. Because I don't really buy into trends, a lot of things in my wardrobe are more like wardrobe staples. Something I always think about is this designer dress that I had wanted for years and years and years and found it on eBay. It retails still for about £5,000 and I got it for £400 and it's just my dream dress. It's like a game-changing dress. I'm extremely confident when buying designer items on eBay. When you buy a luxury item on eBay over a certain price point, that item, at no extra cost to the buyer, goes to the authentication centre, where a team of experts are checking everything from the listing, the photos and the item received, the wording, the dimensions, down to like a forensic degree. For the buyer, it's so reassuring that you know 100% that that item is legit. What annoys me the most about the myths surrounding pre-loved is this like stigma that maybe it will look dirty or it will have holes in it. I'm wearing a luxury vintage men's shirt and some very expensive shoes that weren't very expensive, so it just proves you can get a really elevated look at a really good price. Now we're seeing celebrities on red carpets wearing past season designer and vintage and pre-loved. It's just increasing this awareness around it and really getting our message out there. When eBay asked me to style Love Island, which was obviously the best call of my life, I realised the enormity of it. It's the biggest show on TV, working with the biggest pre-loved platform. Suddenly it's, you know, something desirable instead of being frowned upon. I think to me that's so exciting. And Tasha is having a huge influence on how people think about pre-loved. She has such an enormous audience and her reach is huge.
So many memories already, I'm just wow.
This is obviously, it's like a classic eBay find.
Beautiful. I think it's just such a beautiful colour. It's unique, you don't find it anywhere else. Yeah. You smashed it, literally smashed it.
Since the eBay Love Island partnership, there is definitely a growing interest around buying pre-loved, which is just incredible. But there's always more work to be done, and that's what we're here for.
I admit before I did shop fast fashion, I didn't really have that much awareness around how damaging fast fashion can be to landfill, the planet, garment workers, so many reasons why it's not good to be shopping new fashion.
You know, trends are circular, so now if you see what's coming for spring, summer, you can buy all of it on eBay. Denim's a massive thing, lime green, vintagey lace, slip dresses and lingerie inspired things. It's like nothing is new, it's already there.
I think coming out and talking to you, being with eBay, I've learned so much more. It's so important to share that message that actually pre-loved is actually so much better for the planet and even for money as well.
I really do hope that this work that eBay and I are doing to change perceptions in the partnership with Love Island is only going to increase people's desire for pre-loved. What it is at stake is an acceleration of this climate crisis we're in, and I think as consumers we can make small changes and think pre-loved first to cut down on this need for making and buying new things.
Ready, steady.
Thank you so much, Lara. And we've gotten a couple of questions around if people can see the survey, and we can share it after the masterclass. And speaking about questions, we have a panel now, and if you have questions for the panelists, you can write them directly in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A in the end of the session. But feel free to write them as they come along. So now I want to invite Emma, Mel, and Caroline to the stage, so to say. So please come on. Yes, hello everyone. So we just heard from Lara, and I think it's quite it's quite important to think about that constructive storytelling is important, and I think it's also notion to see that in the last year that people actually care more about sustainability. At least the respondents to this survey, it was approximately 50% that shared that they care more. So I think that means they care more, they think more about it, which hopefully will help the consumption, overconsumption as we speak. And now we have Black Friday coming up next week. Just to start, I want to say, you know, overconsumption is when a company buys or produces more stock than it sells. And if you leave this stock unsold, it can be resold to a third party or it potentially destroyed. And that leaves actually that approximately 30% of clothing isn't sold and another 30% is sold at discount. And both overproduction and these marks down on production or on sales in general will affect both the environment, but also the people who actually produces our clothes. But here it's not only clothes. We also have Caroline, who's from the jewelry industry. So we have with us 3 panelists, 3 women. It's a female panel today, all with really great experience. So welcome all of you. And I want to start out with you, Mel, from Fashion Revolution. So if we think about storytelling that Laura just mentioned, and Black Friday, as I just said, that is coming up, how is the global fashion community currently enabling consumers to purchase and use fashion products?
Yeah, great question, and a really beautiful film, actually. So Black Friday's around the corner, and I think it's the epitome of waste and excess that really illuminates the extremes of overproduction and overconsumption. And I mention them both because they're intrinsically linked, and we need to tackle both if we want to move away from a fashion industry that's wasteful, polluting, and exploitative. And to use an example of this, when we buy into seemingly too good to be true deals, we're arguably sending a message to big fashion brands that it's okay for them to thoughtlessly produce expensive people and planet, because we'll help them get rid of their stockpiles at a really discounted rate. And there's a lot to say about Black Friday marketing tactics and the ways in which consumers are incentivized to buy impulsively. And I'd really recommend reading Sophie Benson's book, The Sustainable Wardrobe, for this. She has a brilliant chapter that kind of traces the shift from a culture of needs to one of desire throughout the 20th century, and talks about the increasingly sophisticated ways in which we are, in her own words, choreographed and manipulated every second of the day as consumers. So the countdown to Black Friday seems to get earlier each year, and it's relentless. You know, your email inbox, your social media feed, supposed places of connection and knowledge exchange are transformed into 24/7 billboard advertisements, essentially. And I'm sure we've all come across scarily specific targeted ads, you know, those draw-dropping flash discounts, but also influencers pretending to be our friends so that we'll buy their clothes, their handbags and shoes in kind of that hope of emulating what is quite an unattainable lifestyle. So I think for the most part, Black Friday really convinces us to buy what we don't need. Finder reported in 2022 that 60% of consumers later regretted a Black Friday purchase they made that year. And, you know, large fashion brands have even been known to reduce their clothes to pennies, to give them away for free, or to overinflate the discount by hiking up the cost beforehand so that kind of discount seems greater than it actually is. And all of this serves to skew our perception of value, which we'll talk about the importance of that a bit later. Of course, that's not to say that all Black Friday purchases are unnecessary. In the prolonged cost of living crisis, sales do help people to access things they otherwise couldn't afford. But nonetheless, we're still left with a lot of disposable and throwaway fashion, and it's a really big kind of problem facing the entire industry.
It definitely is. And if you should just articulate really directly to the point, what are the top consequences, just referring to the actual title of this masterclass, what is the consequences, environmental and socially? The biggest one in your eyes.
I'll give three really quickly, because I think Emma's going to talk about this a bit more. The first would be waste colonialism. So in predominantly the global south, in countries like Ghana and Chile, they're being bombarded with textile waste that's being sent predominantly from the global north, which undermines the local textile industry and comes with a wealth of sort of environmental and health problems. Then this consumption depends on the ever-quickening extraction of labour and natural resources. And it means that human rights and environmental rights abuses are endemic in global supply chains. And a recent study by Greenly estimates that the carbon footprint of fashion and clothing spikes by 70% for Black Friday sales. And I think the third, which can somewhat be overlooked, is the psychological impact consumption has on our sense of self. When we tie our identity and status to what we do when we do not own, the fashion industry readily capitalizes on this. So I've come across research from different kind of marketing agencies that actually advises brands to market to women when they're feeling their most insecure, to sell them beauty products, for example.
It's crazy. Thank you, Mel. And you know, you mentioned several things where I think, Emma, you're from collective fashion justice, and you're confronting injustices in the current fashion system that we have and that we just talked about. Now we also have Cyber Monday and early Black Friday month, and I don't know what it's called nowadays. So what issues do we face with the current overconsumption that the fashion industry is feeding into, if you go more specifically into that?
Yeah, so at Collective Fashion Justice, we work for a total ethics fashion system. So that's one that puts people, our fellow animals, and the planet before profit. We know that the fashion industry today is not one that does that. There are lots of injustices in fashion, and they are all intersecting. You know, we know the vast majority of people who make our clothes are not paid a living wage. We know that 1.5 billion animals are slaughtered in fashion supply chains, and the greenhouse gas emissions and the biodiversity destruction in fashion is really immense. And when we think about the scale of this problem, the impact of those issues becomes more clear. There's a bit more than 8 billion of us on the planet now, and yet we have 100 billion garments made every single year. And that's only an estimate because brands are not openly disclosing how much they're producing, and that needs to happen as well. But, you know, in the US alone, we have estimates that maybe every 5 days on average, someone is buying a garment. So the distribution of those purchases are not even. Us people in wealthy countries have more to kind of consider on that front. And all of this, a way to kind of contextualize the problem here is to think about planetary boundaries. So that is basically, you know, what can the planet afford for us to sustain? And there's really great experts who in Vogue Business, this has been covered, that says that for us to exist within planetary boundaries as a fashion industry, we need to reduce our extraction of natural resources and our waste output by 4-fold. So that's a really significant amount that we need to reconsider how we're dealing with fashion. And while that can seem daunting, I think, you know, to end on a kind of positive note, just as we can't sustain this pace, the planet can't sustain it, it's not justifiable to sustain the amount of exploitation of people and animals. I actually don't think that creatively we can sustain this fast pace. We've lost the ability to allow designers and creatives in the fashion industry to actually just like sit back and take inspiration and look at culture and look at nature. So slowing down fashion is actually also going to help us to come back to the more beautiful aspects of fashion that we all love.
I think that's a really, really valid point around the creativity, because you all know if you need to be creative, you can't do it in a rush. That's often where creativity never happens. You need to get outside, you need to get inspired, and you can't do in a full pace where you need to produce something new every week. Caroline, CEO of Fine Matter, you have a background in consulting and sustainable business development, and actually also previous COO at Global Fashion Agenda. What problematic consequences of consumption led you to starting that new kind of platform for jewelry, which, of what I know, wasn't there before?
No, absolutely. And, you know, basically all of the things that have been mentioned by Mel and Emma, which I think sort of, for me, the core of the issue that we're discussing here, it all links back to the fact that the fashion industry is built on this very linear model, right, of extracting resources from the earth, making consumer products from that with waste along the way, pushing that onto the market without knowing what consumers actually want, and then being required to discount them heavily when they don't sell through. And that's sort of creating all of these issues along the chain and the waste at the end of it. And that's just a very problematic model. Inherently, it's a very wasteful system. And I don't think this system, the system of how the fashion industry is built today, I actually don't think that's how we would design it if we were redesigning it today and if we were starting over. And yeah, like you said, Christina, I've been working in this space for a long time, for the majority of my career. And a few years ago, I sort of had the urge to try and create something that would address this issue, and to create a business that would come forward with a new solution and a new way of doing things, and moving away from this very linear system. And I think for me, the closest that we get to an answer for how to keep producing the products that consumers want and need to make their lives better, and that they want today, is the principle of circularity and the circular economy. So figuring out how we can actually harness all of the creativity that we have in this industry to make products in a more circular kind of way, where we have less extraction from the earth. We reuse what's already there today, repair what's already there, and turn it into new products. And that's basically what my business is now doing in the jewelry industry. It's a platform that enables repairs and repurposing of jewelry, jewelry is inherently a very circular product because you can repurpose and reuse the materials, gold and gemstones, endlessly without loss of quality. We're not so lucky in the fashion space yet, but there are new technologies coming to market for recycling of textiles too. So I'm hoping that can be a bit of a blueprint for how to think about setting up a business in a different way to the traditional linear model.
For sure. I personally think that a lot of brands who also does jewelry on the side, we don't really need that. We need to separate it. But that's just my personal opinion. I also, just for attendees who's watching, again, thank you so much for being here. And please remember that you can write questions in the Q&A and in the chat. We already got just a comment around, we have Black Friday. Could we have Circular Saturday or Sustainable Sunday? Speaking about storytelling, I think it's quite catchy. So thank you, Jennifer, for putting that forward. So again, this was around the consequence of consumption, but we also need to be positive and optimism, and hopefully that's the way it's going, and we need to go that way. So I want to change the narrative a bit and talk about what we can then do. So Emma, what should consumers ask brands, jewelries, if they want to know how they can reduce their negative impact in the way they consume and buy fashion products?
It's a really important question, and I think there are a couple of parts to it. The first is, I think before we go to asking brands questions, there are a couple of questions we need to ask ourselves. Namely, the kind of things that were talked about in the film before. Do we actually really need to buy something new? Is it a purchase that we're going to be proud of when we think of all of the people and potentially animals and ecosystems impacted by it? The Hot and Cool Institute has data that suggests to, again, exist within these planetary boundaries, we really should be only making 5 purchases of newly made garments each year. So, that question then becomes very important, and it's an opportunity for businesses to think about more circular modalities around repair, rejuvenation, resale, rental, all those kinds of things. But if we are buying something new, and, that does happen and it will continue to happen, there are a number of things we can do. In Collective Fashion Justice's manifesto and my book, Total Ethics Fashion, we encourage people to look out for garments that are made by people being paid living wages, that are existing in a more circular kind of model. Maybe they are designed specifically to be repaired better. Maybe it's compostable materials. And then also to look for materials that are helping us move beyond the ones that we know are most harmful. So fossil fuel derived materials, native deforestation based materials, and also animal derived materials that we can be replacing with biomaterials. We also know that, I think, as well as asking brands questions so that we know what we're comfortable with purchasing, our questions can also help to shape the fashion industry. And that's a way that we can engage with fashion, not only as consumers, but as citizens. If we're all asking brands consistently, are people being paid living wages to produce our clothing? That's sending a really strong message that that's something that's important. If I am on the hunt for the perfect pair of boots and I find a brand that I love aesthetically their boots, but they're only offering cowskin leather or polyurethane, a fossil fuel-based material, I might send them an email and say, I love this design. When are you going to be working with innovative biomaterials that move us beyond these materials that I don't want to support? And it's a nice way to kind of tie together consumption that is more responsible and also how you can engage with improving the offerings that the fashion industry has today.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this also kind of addresses the elephant in the room. What you're saying, is it the citizen, the consumer's responsibility, or is it the brands? And I pretty much think it's both of us, and we need to educate ourselves as a consumer. Even though we work with fashion and with sustainability, we also consumers in some sort of degree, but it's also the brands that needs to educate. So it's an important aspect. Mel, what would you say what are the solutions to accelerate more sustainable models of consumption? What specific tools, if you can mention something more specific, is out there?
Yeah, lots of things to pick up on there. I think the importance of questions is really important, because it's how fashion revolution started, asking who made my clothes, what's in my clothes. We've got some really important questions coming out soon around fossil fuel in the supply chain as well. So asking questions, brands do listen. When we asked who made my clothes 10 years ago, brands wouldn't tell us because it was a commercial secret, whereas now it's the standard for business. I'll talk more about transparency later. This could be a whole workshop series in itself, so I picked out 3 things, which I hope is of use. And the first would be to share the burden with your consumers, because again, I don't think it just lays at the consumer's feet. And I think actually quite unfairly, a lot of pressure is placed on the individual to change. You can't ask shoppers to buy and waste less if you're not also willing to play your part. This of course looks like producing less, a lot less if you're a big fashion brand, fourfold according to Vogue Business. But it's also about changing how you sell. And I think the ethical move, which is a pledge businesses can make to commit to more ethical marketing practices, really hits the nail on the head when they say currently the weight rests on the shoulders of consumers to break out of this hamster wheel, but it's missing half of the equation. Because it's high time we, as sellers of goods and services, finally take responsibility for the part we play in the cycle of consumerism. Our marketing relies on scare tactics and psychological manipulation, and it's keeping our consumers insatiable and weak. And I think if brands are really serious about making sustainable choices easy for their customers, they need to move away from predatory marketing tactics that instill a full sense of urgency like the ones I described earlier. The second would be to create value through storytelling, and shoppers increasingly want to be invited behind the scenes of your brand. So, if I'm going to buy a new dress and I'm told its creation story, I'm told who grew the fibres, who dyed the fabric, who stitched the seams, who packed the order, I kind of inherit this sort of duty to continue its story by creating new memories with every wear, and by caring for it because I truly understand its value. And ways brands might do this is through a short film series, kind of tracing the journey of their products from start to finish. Maybe they include personalized stories about who make the clothes on the labels themselves, or develop long-term relationship with influencers who promote alternative aspirational lifestyles around rewearing and restyling the same branded pieces, which for brands is also a testament to the piece's timelessness and kind of versatility and durability. And our co-founder, Ursula de Castro, captures this sentiment perfectly in her book Love Clothes Last, which explores the social, environmental and kind of personal benefits to deepening our relationship with our wardrobe. And the third would be to make it as easy as possible for your customers to increase the longevity of their purchases. So this could include offering in-house repair or tailoring services, personalised care advice at the point of purchase, or offering take-back schemes where return clothes are either upcycled or resold to other customers. I think if you put out thousands of temporarily trendy clothes every week, you use impulsive marketing tactics, and you reduce your clothes to pennies, you're kind of giving the impression that they're worthless. But on the other hand, if you encourage slow and intentional purchases, make clothes are worth repairing and caring for, and you make it really easy to do that, you're communicating value that your customers will also share. And the one thing that I would really recommend everyone read is the Sustainable Fashion Communications Playbook. It's co-authored by UNEP and UN Climate Change, and that provides plenty of guidance on, reducing messages around overconsumption and kind of shifting aspiration to more sustainable lifestyles.
Thanks, Mel, and we'll make sure to include all of these references that you're speaking about in the small summary that'll come out in the beginning of the new year as a summary of all the key takeaways from this session. And again, for audiences who's listening in, just want to remind you about that you can ask questions in the Q&A if you like. I want to turn back to you, Caroline, in terms of we're discussing what you can do as a brand for the customers. So how does Fine Matter support consumers with engaging with the circular consumption model or system? And how have these of your clients responded to that? Because it was the first one. How do they respond to something that's different like that?
Also, I very much agree with what Mel was saying earlier, that the Onyx is very much on businesses to make these types of new consumption models available and not just pushing new product on the market. So I think the first thing that we did, and that we had sort of very, very like basic success with, was just making these new models available to consumers. So making repairs available, making repurposing available, making recycling available on our site. We're an online marketplace. So, just surfacing that and putting an emphasis on it at the same level as that of buying new really sort of worked for us and caught the interest of consumers. And I think there's a real appetite to care for the items that you own. And we saw that in the numbers earlier too. So even just sort of making it accessible, I think there's a lot of reluctance or fear from brands and businesses when I speak with other founders or other business leaders in opening up for these kinds of services, and that they will like cannibalize the sale of new products, or that consumers might not resonate with it or whatnot. But I think sort of in this day and age, you can't really like not have that be an option for your consumers for how to shop with you as a brand. So that's like plain and simple, number one, just make it available. And then number two, we really sort of thought long and hard about how to make repairs and repurposing as attractive as buying new. For us, that meant sort of positioning it and encapsulating it in a beautiful brand, making it sort of feel creative, connecting people with some of the best creative jewelry designers in the world for repurposing and so on. So that as an experience, you are really getting as much value and joy and benefit from that purchase, or even more, versus what you would if you had bought something new that you just bought sort of off the shelf. And that was a really sort of important piece for us, and still is. And I think it's also why it's clicked for so many people to use this service. We had to be super explicit in our communications though. So that's like the first piece I'd highlight, is just be super straightforward in terms of communicating about what, if you're offering repairs, what exactly does that mean? What do you accept? What don't you accept? How will it work? Who will sort of insure the piece as it's in transit or it's held by the brand? What happens if something goes wrong? These sort of like very, very basic considerations or fears that a consumer might have before leaning into repairs and repurposing, I think is key. And then last but not least, educating consumers as well on the impact or lack of impact that they might have by taking this behavior versus looking at buying new. I think sort of goes hand in hand with having this type of offering and offering this type of service. And it's important for people. They want to sort of know, how are things made and how would they be repaired, and what's the value of the materials that my piece of jewelry or a piece of clothing is made out of. What can I turn it into? And if you have this expertise as a brand because you're working in the field or you're looking into it in depth, I think it's worthwhile sort of sharing that back to consumers and taking them on that journey with you as a company.
And to add to that, this will also be something that brands will, in terms of regulation, have to do at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you asked me earlier, like, what's the reception been of the people who've used these services with Fine Matter? I think like what we've seen is they've fallen in two groups. So either it's the sort of slightly less educated on the sustainability front, a customer who's come through our services and used either our repairs or repurposing services. And they will often be sort of a little bit apprehensive at first. So like they will ask a whole lot of questions, can I trust this? How will it work? Is it really true you can repair my jewelry? We get a lot of that as well. So they don't really sort of trust that it's possible even. And then that turns to sort of surprise when a piece of jewelry comes back looking as good as new or even better, and almost like exaltation, because there's also this emotional connection that people have with their jewelry, and they have that with their clothes as well. I for one have it with my clothes too, right? You have this sort of emotional connection to something that you've owned for a long time, and maybe you've worn it every single day. So you get that feeling of like, oh wow, I can hold on to it, I can keep wearing it. It's really important to me, and that's a really sort of great response that we've had. And then I think interestingly as well, you have a subsegment of consumers that are really highly educated on sustainability, or like they're very values driven in their purchases, which is great. And they're like leading the field and questioning brands and asking all of these questions. And what we've seen from them is there's actually quite a lot of anger, I would say, at other brands and companies that would not offer repairs or not offer repurposing. So we can see that in the public reviews of other big jewelry brands, for instance, that don't do any sorts of repairs or repurposing, they would just offer to replace rather than repair. And there's a lot of consumers that have, I would say, righteous anger at that, because how can you be a big company and produce all of these products, but then not take responsibility for them if they break, or even just want to continue to live on. And those consumers feel that this is the right way to consume and to be responsible consumers today.
Yeah, and I think it's important you mentioned trust, because everything you say, I mean, it also shows that the industry, the customers doesn't trust the brands, because they also put everything on sale quickly. They cheat them basically. So it's interesting that then you try to build the trust and they don't feel trusted. They question that you're actually trying to be good. It's scary in a way, right?
I think it's fair enough. I think it's fair enough that consumers are asking questions and being doubtful and sort of going into the details. So I quite like that, consumers asking a lot of questions.
Definitely. I'm just looking at time. We need to move to the Q&A now. Let me just check here. We got a lot of interesting questions, and of course, a lot of the attendees in this specific masterclass cares about sustainability. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. So maybe for Emma, do you have an idea on how do we actually reach basically those who are not here today, hearing all of this, who needs to hear it? Any specific concrete answers to that question?
I think that's when we as citizens, and also particularly as people who are a part of the fashion industry, need to start thinking about how we can band together to have further policy level change, because policy is what impacts everyone. And it means that citizens don't have to, spend their busy lives, which are full of all kinds of different things that they have to think about, thinking about clothes as often and as much, if policy is helping them to make sure that those purchases will be better, or if policy is helping them to make sure that they're not going to have to combat as much greenwashing and ethics washing. I think often the fashion industry can be a little hesitant and scared, honestly, of incoming legislation and regulation around the fashion industry and how it can market itself and how it has to be transparent and how it has to produce. But it's coming either way. And I think brands that champion and are willing to say, this is important and we may not necessarily be perfect yet, but this regulation is going to help equalize the industry by making us all need to deal with this. It's a really important way for us to move forward. And it means that it doesn't matter if someone is not in this room, because that policy is going to impact everyone.
For sure. Mel, I also just want to hear from you. Because it's always good to have some more action-oriented replies to this as well. So how can we steer the industry's communication towards this positive impact that we all try to strive to?
Yeah, I think transparency is really important for a lot of things we're talking about, kind of trust, for countering greenwashing and whatnot. Why? I think because transparency is the first step, and I emphasize that it's the crucial first step for measuring and reducing fashion's impact. Without it, problems go unaddressed in global supply chains, and we can't fix what we can't see. And your customers have a right to know how, where, by whom, and at what human and environmental cost your clothes are made. So to give some FR context, every year we publish the Global Fashion Transparency Index. It's an annual report. It's spotlighting how much information the world's largest fashion brands and retailers are sharing about their social and environmental policies, practices, and impacts in their own operations and across their supply chain. And what our findings show is there's a large say-do gap, where more brands are making self-police commitments than they are that actually showing the progress and impacts of this. And that's where we start to see like a lot of distrust, which kind of trickles down to small businesses. And I think that's quite unfair, when we're seeing a lot of greenwashing by big fashion brands. One area that we're seeing this, and I've seen that in a question as well, is around introducing things like repair, like resale, like rental, but doing it in a greenwashy way where it overemphasizes the circularity of it all, when it's not actually changing the overall business model. And true circularity needs to reduce and ultimately replace production and slow down consumption. And so here, being transparent about where you are, not just where you want to be, is really important. Another area where we're seeing that brands aren't sharing even the most basic of information is around their production and waste outputs. And that's information any kind of viable, financially viable brand will have. So for some stats, 88% of brands and retailers do not share their annual production volumes, and then 96% don't disclose the amount of pre and post-production waste they produce each year. And this deliberate lack of transparency kind of hides the true cost and scale of overproduction, but it also is again placing the onus on the consumer and ignoring the role that brands play in overproduction. So I just want to use one example of like an action I'd love everyone to take today. Our friends at the Orr Foundation, they run a campaign called Stop Waste Colonialism, and ahead of Black Friday they're asking all fashion brands of all sizes to disclose how many clothes they produced last year to speak volumes. Lots of brands have replied. They're mostly small. I don't think that's a surprise, that they're doing things well. They don't have nothing to hide, but also I think transparency for them is not just a business standard, it's a way of connecting with their customers. So it has many benefits.
Thank you, Mel. Sorry, I'm just also
sorry rushing through.
No. I love your answers, and we just have so many good questions, and I want to be conscious of time. Can't expect people to just hang on, right? Even though we could continue forever. You also mentioned greenwashing. We also have a comment around, if people pursue something as greenwashing, how do you actually comment on that, and how do you change that? Caroline or Mel or Emma, maybe, do you have a very concrete to the point answer to that question? It's a bit of a big one, I know.
I think on greenwashing, like, the way that we need to address it, particularly if it's a brand that is kind of intentionally hiding the bulk of their harmful production by showing a small good thing that they're doing, like we've been talking about, I think that's when we need to be able to have more transparency and to mandate more transparency so that it's more clear that this is a small part of a much bigger picture. And I think that's when those people here in the room that are more aware of that as compared to the general public have a responsibility to use that knowledge that we have to make it more clear to the public. I think information sharing is such an important part of this, and we all have that capacity within our own communities and with our own industry.
Yeah. No, agreed on that. And just reading through some of the comments, a quite interesting one I actually just found is how do we get, and maybe that is for one of you as well, and maybe also Julie, Caroline, so how do we get the older target group, plus 50? So the older generations, how do you get them to care about recycling or sustainability? Personally, I'd say that my nearest family who is older, they try and care, but they don't really get it, right? Because they grew up in another way. What would be the best way to go home and talk to your grandparents about that?
Well, I sort of, as a business owner and with my commercial hat on, I would probably try to highlight some of the advantages that are not only related to the environmental or social impact and the benefits of that, but actually highlighting how there's also money to be saved here. There's other benefits, like in jewelry, we really sort of highlight the messaging of continuing on with the emotional connection which you might have with a piece of jewelry that you've owned and worn for a long time. And I think some of these arguments can very easily be made for pre-loved or repairs or repurposing or whatnot, and that might help encourage people who might be a little bit reluctant to get started.
Yeah, you need to catch the target group based on what they really care about. We don't we have more questions, but we don't have more time. We just want to wrap this up. So I just want to thank you, Emma, Mel, and Caroline, for being here. It was really a pleasure, and we'll share all the resources in this summary in the new year. And thank you so much for joining. So if we can just get the slides up again, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I just want to mention we have the next masterclass of this series in 3 weeks' time on the 14th of December, which is about sustainability claims, how to build trust with your community. So definitely sign up for that. Next slide, please. Yes, and as you know, Global Fashion Agenda, we are pretty much really known for our summit, the largest event on sustainable fashion globally. And we just launched our ticket sale yesterday. The summit takes place in Copenhagen, the 22nd and 23rd of May. There is a link in the chat. There is 10% off the tickets until January. So we really want to see you there. It's our 15 years anniversary. It's we hope the last summit was held 2009. With that being said, I want to say thank you so much for joining, everyone. This will be online on the website tomorrow. Also, feel free to scan this QR code to watch the Fashion Redressed film that Laura talked about earlier. All right, so thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening and the rest of your day.